The movie begins with animals howling and the sound of a door rattling. A girl in a sky blue dress rushes out of the door, panting and seemingly petrified. She's yelling and running as quickly as she can, but then she immediately stumbles and falls. The terrified look on her face is amplified as her makeup is ruined, and there's a stain of blood on her face. This lady in distress doesn't look the part as she's all adorned with a pearl necklace and a tiara. There's also a sash around her, tagged "Winner," which is quite ironic as she's laid on the floor and in seeming danger and defeat. She's screaming as an unidentified person stands in front of her, with a stool in their hands, which they use to attack her. The movie now transitions into a room where Grace is packing and sorting out some clothes to rightly place in her luggage. We meet Rob, her boyfriend, who's leaning on the wall and making fun of her for packing so much. He is the son of a rich and famous Whitby household. He says that they're only going for the weekend. They're visiting Rob's parents, and Grace opens up about her anxiety about meeting his mom, saying that she thinks his mom would probably stereotype her and label her as a gold digger. But Rob immediately debunks that. May, who is Grace's friend and roommate, walks into the scene to remind them about their hope to beat traffic. Rob leaves the room to go pull the car around. Just then, May catches Grace looking through the window, lost in thought. She asks Grace what's up with her, and Grace tells her how she thinks Rob has been acting weird. May immediately responds by saying that Rob has always been weird. Grace then proceeds to tell her friend that she thinks Rob might propose, and she says it's just a weird feeling she gets. May tries to be supportive by telling Grace that she's happy for her, but not ignoring the fact that Grace has only known Rob for 3 months, and that she should be cautious in her proceeding further with him. May goes on by saying that people of his status don't regard people like them. Still chatting, the girls look down the window at Rob, who's leaning on the already parked vehicle, tapping his watch, which signifies that time is running out. The two friends hug, but not before May makes Grace promise to call her. It's a long trip to Rob's parents' house, and Grace sleeps through the whole ride. They eventually arrive and Rob gently wakes her up. Grace comes out of the vehicle, utterly blown away at the sight of Rob's parents' house. It's a gorgeous apartment covered in snow, the snow which highlights the dark painting of the exterior of the apartment. Rob and Grace find their way into the house, and Grace is still in awe and admiration of the beauty of the house. As the two keep walking, they approach the Whitbys. The first thing Rob's mother says is that they are late, and Grace takes the blame for their late arrival. Rob's father introduces himself as Stephen, stretching his arm out for a handshake, which Grace obliges, who says he heard a lot about her. And Grace responds stating how she hopes it's good things he's heard. Strangely enough, she struggles to let go of his gripping arm. Just then, Rob arrives and exchanges pleasantries with his parents as well. Grace is still overwhelmed by the aesthetic of the apartment as Stephen offers her a tour. Rob calls out that he would just go and grab their stuff. While on the tour, Grace doesn't cease to compliment the house once again. Stephen gives credit to his wife Miriam, saying that she's the brains behind the whole operation. Miriam only chuckles at this comment. It's a quick tour, and moments later, Rob, who had earlier left to bring both his and Grace's luggage in, joins them outside, where they stand in clear view of a place Miriam reveals to be the garage. Miriam then suggests that Rob must be exhausted, as he usually is after long rides, so he should show Grace to his room to freshen up. Stephen also adds that they could all reconvene after an hour in Rob's room. Grace admires some trophies on a table, while Rob lies on the bed. He admits that his mother was right, and he indeed needs a rest. Grace says he could sleep, but since she already slept through their ride there, she is going to poke around. She leaves the room and Rob shuts his eyes. Grace walks through a hallway as she comes across a room with its door ajar. She walks into it and has a look around. It seems to be a little girl's room as per its appearance. Grace walks up to a table where a pink stereo is. She rests her arms on it and unintentionally turns it on. She's startled by the immediate and sudden loud music that begins to boom out of it and fumbles to turn it off. She moves aside and comes across a dressing table this time. It has a picture frame on it, which has an image of a girl in a blue dress. Nearby, she sees a gold dragonfly necklace dangling. Curious, she reaches out to touch it, but she is then startled by Rob, who taps her shoulder. She quickly whips around and notices that Rob is rather upset by her presence in that room. He reveals to Grace that no one ever went there, not even the housekeeper. Completely ignoring all that he had to say, Grace asks Rob if he has a sister. Rob affirms this, as he says her name is Jenny, and that she disappeared 10 years ago. Shocked by the news, Grace inquires why Rob never told her. Grace wants more details about this sudden news he has dropped on her, but Rob would rather not discuss this painful topic any longer. He claims it's a sore subject, and asks Grace to be careful and not bring it up around his sensitive parents. To lighten up the mood, the two go back to their room and have an intimate moment together. Afterwards, Grace goes out to go to the washroom when she comes face to face with Miriam. The woman says she came to wake them up, but turns out they are already up. Poor Grace feels a little shy considering the deed they were just doing. On the other hand, Miriam also doesn't let it go and cruelly puts her on the spot. After what seems like an eternity, the woman finally excuses herself and rushes to the bathroom. Later, Grace and Rob, along with his parents, sit down for a drink. They discuss Rob's previous girlfriend Trisha, who was loud and a picky eater. Grace shares about the loss of her parents and the struggles that came with it. She finishes her drink, but begins to feel lightheaded. Excusing herself, saying she needs to lay down a bit, she goes back to the bedroom and passes out. Grace wakes up moments later and feels Rob nearby, but as she turns on her cell phone light, he vanishes. Coming out, she meets Penelope, the housekeeper, who tells her dinner is ready. They're all sitting at the dinner table talking cheerfully when Grace unintentionally blurts out how Rob must have been a great big brother. This causes a stir. The topic upsets Stephen, and the atmosphere immediately becomes rather tense. Grace is instantly remorseful. She says that Rob had told her not to say anything, and she never meant to bring it up. Miriam escorts the apologetic Grace to another room. She apologizes again and asks Miriam how it happened. After sighing, the woman begins to narrate what happened with Jenny. She tells her how 10 years ago, on a lonely night, Jenny disappeared. They were about to have dinner, but the girl was nowhere to be found. The family searched around and even called the authorities, yet nothing happened. Grace apologizes once again, and Miriam tells her that she'd find a way to make it up to Stephen since he is the most affected by the topic. In the next scene, we see Grace on the phone with her friend May. She tells her feelings to May, saying that she feels she's blowing things. She tells May about Rob's mysterious sister's disappearance, but May is surprised by this information, saying she's never heard of it on the news, and it is a topic that should be gold to journalists, as per Whitby's status in society. Grace makes nothing of this, telling May that not everything is a conspiracy. Just as they hang up, Stephen walks into the scene. He calls Grace and offers her to join him for a drink. Grace, who is trying to make up for what she had caused earlier, obliges. They sit and talk for a while about Jenny. He says that he likes talking about his daughter, and that she reminds him of her. As they talk, he caresses her face, and the woman quickly moves back. Moments later, Grace leaves, saying that she's tired and would like to get some sleep. On her way up the stairs, she has a quick chat with Penelope, who she feels is jealous of her. That night, as Grace is getting ready for bed, Rob apologizes for not telling her about his sister Jenny. He says he didn't want to ruin their weekend and didn't mean for her to have a hard time. On the other hand, May leaves a message on a voicemail for Grace. May has found out some disturbing news, and she tells Grace to call her back when she gets the message. Grace does get the message later that night. While she's using the restroom, she decides to call May, and they talk about all the information May found about Jenny. Turns out, Jenny used to be in a child beauty pageant, and one day, just out of the blue, she stopped competing. For some unknown reason, the media refused to get involved in her case. Perhaps her rich parents paid them off. Grace can't understand why they would do this, but May believes that rich people are somehow quite psycho. Thus, she must be careful. She also asks her to call her back in the morning. Just as they hang up, Grace revisits the room she found earlier, which was Jenny's. She observes that the picture in the frame is no longer there, and she picks up the dangling gold necklace with a dragonfly pendant. Just then, Miriam sneaks up on Grace. Startled, she accidentally puts the necklace inside her pocket. Miriam appears to be tipsy and jokes about Stephen snoring like a recycling truck. The two women chat, and Miriam creepily suggests that Stephen is quite taken with her. Grace is a bit surprised and corrects her that she must mean Rob. They leave the room and part ways. Back in her room, Grace realizes she forgot to return the necklace she took from Jenny's room. She then places it in a drawer alongside her phone and goes to sleep. The next morning, Grace wakes up and cannot find Rob beside her. She also can't find the necklace and her phone, which she had placed side by side in the drawer. She leaves the room and meets everyone in the kitchen, where Stephen immediately offers her a glass of smoothie. They all seem to claim it to be a hangover cure. On the other hand, May is worried about Grace, who hasn't called again since they spoke. She texts Grace and gets a response immediately, but May finds this response weird. In reality, it's Miriam posing as Grace texting May. Grace is still looking for her phone, and in the process, she has a little confrontation with Penelope, the housekeeper. Both of them are still not on good terms. Penelope tells her that she has seen too many girlfriends come to this house. Creepily enough, they all look just like her, and they all disappeared after the weekends and never came back. Grace accuses Penelope of trying to sabotage her relationship with Rob, but Penelope claims she's just trying to warn her. Next, we see Miriam and Rob alone in a room. Miriam shows Rob what she found in Grace's drawer. It turns out to be the dragonfly necklace and her phone, which she has been texting May with. Instead of being shocked and asking her mother what she is doing with his girlfriend's phone, Rob pleads with her to give Grace a chance. He says that even Steven likes her. It seems that he too is an accomplice. On the other side, Grace is not feeling good. She keeps getting dizzy. Plus, she can't find her phone. As she is bent down, looking for her phone under the bed, Steven sneaks up behind her. Scared and annoyed, she looks around for Rob, and when she is unable to find him, she just storms off with her bag, claiming that she needs some fresh air. Miriam and Steven aren't okay with this, and they follow her every step of the way. Grace gets to the car, but can't make it inside it and passes out. Moments later, Grace wakes up strapped to a chair with Miriam and Steven in front of her. They reveal their plan to give her a makeover and transform her into their daughter Jenny. Grace is terrified by this revelation. She yells and screams for help, calling for Rob, who is simply nowhere to be found. Miriam doesn't like the top Grace is wearing, so she uses a pair of scissors to cut through it. Steven then injects her with a substance that immediately knocks her out. On the other side, a concerned May is still trying to reach out to Grace and is getting weird replies to her texts. It's all suspicious to her. Soon enough, May sees that Grace's notifications have been turned off. Grace wakes up again and finds herself sitting before a projector that's playing some footage of a little girl who appears to be Jenny. She has been given a total makeover as Miriam and Steven had earlier promised. A petrified Grace struggles to set herself free and succeeds. She hurriedly unstraps her wrists from the chair, and when she gets to her ankle, she realizes a device with a red light around it. She struggles to take it off, but can't, so she just lets it be. Quickly getting up from the chair, she approaches the door, which is locked. The woman successfully picks the lock and runs out into the open. She's barely run a few meters when the device around her ankle buzzes and a current passes through her. Turns out, they have placed a bracelet taser around her ankle to restrain her movement. Grace screams in agony and falls down. She knows she has to take the device off if she's to successfully escape. Going back into the apartment, she stealthily climbs up the stairs, gets into a room and grabs a bunch of keys lying on a table. Just then, Rob walks in. Seeing him, she is quite upset. She inquires where he has been and proceeds to accuse him of being part of his parents' sick plan. However, Rob denies this, and he tries to gaslight her. Just as Grace is about to escape, she's obstructed by Miriam and Steven, who walk into the room. Rob lifts Grace from behind and pushes her on the bed, successfully tying her up. Back to the other side. May is still trying to find clues about Rob's mysterious parents. She's on her laptop doing some research when her phone chimes. It's a notification that states that Grace's location has been turned off. Grace is taken back to the mysterious room, where Miriam is preparing her for some sort of beauty pageant. Miriam is giving Grace instructions on how to walk and behave. She threatens Grace, telling her that if she doesn't oblige to her instructions, they would resort to cruel punishments. Grace has no other option but to cooperate. Steven walks in and inquires about how Grace is putting up. The woman complains, saying that Grace is useless since she is quite heavily and even struggles to stand up. Grace is just all over the place and can't seem to find her footing. She feels dizzy and struggles to keep up with Miriam's timing and instructions. In the next scene, Grace wakes up strapped to a bed. Just in time, Miriam and Steven enter the room, and they offer her a cup of juice. Grace is now familiar and acquainted with Miriam and Steven's methods and tricks of getting her intoxicated. So, just when she's offered the drink, she sneezes intentionally and spills it all over herself. To clean her, Miriam takes off Grace's soiled clothes, and Steven appears to be displeased with what Grace is wearing. As he storms off, the woman gives Grace a t-shirt and tells her to obediently play along instead of overcomplicating things for them or herself. On the other side, May is now desperately trying to contact the police. She's worried about her friend. The police, instead of beginning a search for Grace, get into her records and come up with silly assumptions. They claim that she was last seen with a man whom they tried looking up but found nothing. As she is talking, the police hang up and May is left devastated. The poor, uneasy, and anxious girl has no idea of Grace's whereabouts. For all she knows, Grace could be in danger. The scene shifts, and we now see Grace dressed up as a little girl, seated, or rather tied, in her bedroom. Steven walks in, holding up 2 cups, and offers her a drink. Scared, she calls him Daddy, and Steven is greatly pleased by this. She tries to stretch out her arms and take the cup of juice offered to her by Stephen, but then is restrained since she's strapped to the bed. It appears now that Grace has accepted playing Stevens' daughter Jenny. Stephen puts a picture of Grace dressed up as Jenny in a frame and smiles at her while she sleeps. On the other hand, May has successfully found the location of the Whitbys. She grabs her keys and a pepper spray and leaves to go find Grace. And that, folks, is what a best friend is. Grace and Stephen are lying on the bed. They seem to be having a good time together. Grace then pleads with him to take her to see the pond. After a while of begging, he unstraps her and is about to take her to the pond, but Miriam stops them in their tracks. She leads Grace back inside and makes her drink her juice, the drink which has been a routine for her now. Grace drinks it while Stephen goes to get her a snack. Miriam expresses how uncomfortable she feels with Grace's new behavior, but she defends herself by saying she's only doing as Miriam instructed, that she's only playing along. When Miriam leaves, Grace gets up from the bed, since the couple forgot to restrap her. She picks up her pair of sneakers and approaches the door. She had earlier placed a piece of bubblegum on the door to prevent it from locking, and it worked out perfectly for her. A heavily dizzy Grace makes a run for it, but bumps into Penelope on her way. Grace narrates all her horrible experiences and the torture she had faced at the hands of the Whitbys. While she's busy asking her for help, they hear a car pull over, and they both run into hiding. While hiding behind the building, they see Rob step out of a car and go inside the apartment. Rob gets into the house and starts calling out for everyone. The scene shifts, and we see May arrive. She parks by the woods and immediately comes out of her vehicle. Rob and Miriam find Stephen, who's looking at a picture of the real Jenny emotionally. Miriam and Rob break the news of Grace's disappearance to Stephen. They suspect Penelope of taking her. Just then, there's a sound of some sort of alarm that indicates trespassing. On the other hand, Penelope struggles to take an intoxicated Grace to safety. In the woods, they come across May, who immediately assumes Penelope is evil and pepper sprays her before she even gets the chance to speak, and she's in pain. All of a sudden, Rob arrives and grabs May from behind. Stephen rushes to Grace and Miriam to Penelope, who's lying on the floor. Her eyes are already reacting to the effect of the spray as they are red. Miriam expresses her disappointment in Penelope, and the latter unhesitatingly apologizes. She says that she won't tell, but it is all too late. Miriam picks up a log and dashes it right across Penelope's face, who screams in agony. Her only crime is that she has a good heart. Soon it is nightfall. Grace tries to express her concern for May, but Stephen is far from it. Either he's completely ignoring her or unable to process her words in his brain. The next day, Miriam reveals to Grace that May is alive and intends to keep it that way if Grace cooperates and promises to be the most perfect little Jenny they've ever had. Grace hastily promises. After dinner, they have a performance. Grace is dressed up in a green dress, her hair and makeup done, and Stephen is just in awe of her appearance. He compliments Miriam for a job well done. After the little performance, they all share drinks. Stephen compliments Grace for a good performance, and Miriam seems to be impressed as well. They gift her with a winter sash. Later, they all escort Grace to her room and tuck her in. She bids them all good night. When Rob leans in to peck her, she stealthily reaches into his pocket and takes something out of it. Later that night, when they all leave Grace alone, she sneaks out of her room. But on her way out, Rob finds her. She tells him she was only coming to find him, and she reminds him of the promise he had made her to show her the jacuzzi. He willingly takes her there. While in the jacuzzi, Grace inquires about the other girls he had brought. With this, she gets Rob talking. Rob confesses to despising Jenny and claims Miriam hated her as much as he did. Rob tries to drown Grace in the jacuzzi while telling her this, and a helpless Grace begins screaming for help. Stephen arrives just in time and pulls Rob out of the jacuzzi. He then rushes to Grace, who unhesitatingly tells him that Rob took out Jenny. Stephen is so upset by this information and reaches to attack Rob, but Miriam stops him, saying that it was an accident. Stephen is surprised to realize that Miriam knew. It's a heated back and forth argument between Stephen and Miriam. The man begins to accuse Miriam of always disliking Jenny and loving Rob more. A furious Stephen grabs Miriam in agitation. He accuses Miriam of being a narcissist, and at that moment, Rob sneaks up behind him and hits his head with a brick. Amidst the chaos, Grace runs away and Miriam is in tears, seeing Stephen is on the floor, unconscious. Grace rushes to her friend May, who's tied up in the salon. She helps her get free, but before they run away, Miriam walks through the door. She immediately attacks Grace, but it's 2 against 1, as May is free and helps her bestie. They soon overpower her, and it is now Miriam who is strapped in the chair, screaming for help. The jailer has now become the prisoner. Grace turns on the projector and turns on the machine which Miriam had threatened her with. The machine goes directly at Miriam's face and gouges her eyes out. Grace is standing right in front of her, and the blood splatters all over her face. She seems to be relishing the moment and enjoying the view as Miriam is slayed. Soon, Grace and May leave the salon. They find an unconscious Stephen, and Grace immediately wants to help him. May objects to this, saying that it's Stockholm Syndrome and they should leave. But Grace genuinely wants to help Stephen. Rob attacks Grace, inquiring his mother's whereabouts. He's strangling her, but Stephen comes to her rescue again. He uses the same brick Rob used on him and pushes Rob into the jacuzzi. Stephen and Grace team up and cover the top of the jacuzzi. Rob drowns while screaming for help. May is terrified by the amount of violence and gore, and rushes inside to call the police. As May leaves, Grace asks Stephen if he meant it when he said he'll give up everything. Stephen confirms this. He says he just wants someone to be proud of. That being said, Grace rushes to find May. She doesn't want May to contact the police, but May refuses to listen to her. Seeing this, Grace snatches May's phone, and this leads to a disagreement between the two. The two get into a scuffle and end up fighting. They both reach for the table, each struggling for possession of a thick glass object. Just then, there's a loud thud, and there's a shower of blood on the glass and the carpet. In the next scene, we see a lady who is barely visible. Then we see a crowd of people seated and someone addressing the crowd. This unrevealed person is dressed in pink, and the dragonfly pendant is visible on her chest. As the camera moves up, it turns out to be Grace. She is posing as Jenny, standing on a podium, launching an art gallery. The movie ends with a happy Stephen who climbs up the podium and affectionately pecks his well-trained, made-up daughter. Money sure makes the mayor go.